Hello and welcome to Why Wait Till Sunday. It is Tuesday and we are going to go over the 2023 class of wide receivers and throw a couple tight ends there at the end because, these are players where they just finished their freshman season. So, tight ends is hard enough to find draft eligible guys that you really care too much about for fantasy purposes. So looking 3 years out, we're only going to cherry pick the absolute guys who have stud potential, and there's a couple. But breaking down the wide receivers, so all these guys just finished their freshman year. They were true freshmen. They are now rising sophomores, and we're going to expect them, if all things go according to plan, that they are entering the 2023 NFL draft. Basically, especially with wide receivers, but it does count for running backs too. If you're stashing a guy on your dynasty Devy roster, or even if rostering them in C2C, hoping that they, become NFL assets, you're really, you need them to be a 3-year jump to the NFL. Fourth-year guys can be nice, but if you're stashing a guy, you definitely are hoping he's good enough, shows enough to go ahead and make that jump. So this is what we're going to assume, at least for the top 10. And then I'm going to throw in some watch list guys. Number one, and he was pretty high up in the Rivals rankings, but I don't think he was the consensus number one. He is now for me pretty easily, to be honest with you. Kayshon Boutte for LSU. He's 6 feet, 185. He was either a high 4-star or a 5-star, depending on where you looked. He wound up 47 receptions, 735 yards, 5 touchdowns, a market share of 20% as a true freshman in the SEC is outstanding. By some people's measures, that's a breakout as an 18-year-old. I mean, that's just rare and fantastic. Here's the kicker for me. He only played in the slot 7% of his snaps. So, while Terrace Marshall played tons in the slot, Boutte was frequently on the outside and frequently, basically just sent out to beat his man in one-on-one situations. And, he had a slower start to the season, but still the total ended up being 20% market share. And when Marshall opted out, for the rest of the 3 game in the season, Boutte was 47% of the receptions and yards. I believe it was 37% of the receptions and 57% of the yards. If you go cut that in half, it's 47%, or in the middle average. Sensational. I mean, that's just, I know it's a 3-game sample, but I'm not sure there's many other freshman receivers who do that in a 3-game sample ever. That's just, I mean, it's incredible. So, and what he showed, he also returned punts, true freshman. That's a positive indicator. But what he just showed on the field, he was beating guys, in one-on-one coverage on the outside. He's got good size, and assuming he'll put on some pounds, starting at 6 feet, 185, I think it's pretty easy to see him get up to 200, which would just be just fine. No problems there. No concerns about size. He's showing that he's a true X, weapon at wide receiver at a very early age. And it's beautiful. I mean, he had 1 catch. So I was actually, preparing to write a draft guide. So looking into the upcoming rookies, and Terrace Marshall, was next on my list. So I was actually looking at some film for Terrace Marshall. And let me tell you, Boutte really kind of stole the show. When Marshall was playing, Boutte was not getting the same amount of targets, but he was making big catches. He was making big plays. And one that got called back, but was absolutely incredible, was, an OBJ style corner of the end zone. I guess it was really 2 hands, not one, but full extension up over his head, falling backwards into the end zone. Actually, it wasn't called back. I think it was maybe just barely incomplete by like half of a foot in bounds or something like that. So, won't make the stat sheet and probably won't make many highlight reels because it wasn't didn't end up, a completed pass. But just the skills he showed to, basically make that catch. It's one of those. It was like barely juggled, either that or a blade of grass out of bounds, but it was basically a catch and just sensational. Um, and if that's what we can look forward to for the next 2 years, he's going to be in just absolutely a candidate for the first receiver taken in his respective NFL draft. And yeah, currently pretty easily my wide receiver one in this class right now. Just on field production, the pedigree was there, even though he wasn't deemed number one in his class, but certainly a very high rated recruit. And then just dominated on the field. He was a DFS gem because when Marshall opted out, I just locked and load Boutte in a bunch of for a bunch of weeks in a row, and they never kept increasing his price, even though he went crazy, was scoring touchdowns. He was getting all the volume. Like I said, 47% market share. So, absolutely incredible. Basically did everything you could ask him to do. Was relevant, was starting even when Marshall was there, and Marshall was hogging most of the targets, but he was starting from day one. And, people are going to want to make excuses for guys who didn't do much because of COVID. But as you can see here in this list I'm going to go over, plenty of true freshmen did do something. So I'm still thinking if a guy didn't do anything, it's a bit of a concern. So anyway, there's just not much more you can say about Boutte. I think he's got everything you could look for. His tape is somewhat limited because he really came on in the last couple of games. We'll get more on him as the years go by, of course, nitpick a little bit more. But, basically at this point, you're just looking to see if a guy can do some things, and he absolutely can. Well, there'll be plenty of time to nitpick some negatives in his game, but just incredible freshman season. And so then we'll move on to Marvin Mims from Oklahoma. Now, this is a guy who wasn't quite as high rated. Certainly not near the top, even though he was, borderline legendary high school player in the state of, I think he was from Oklahoma. But 5'11", 177, wound up with a 20% market share. For the whole season, and it was a little bit weird. He was kind of in and out of the team's good graces. Kind of would go games without really, playing a whole lot, which was odd. Let me see the game log here because, he started off like gangbusters. He was 3 for 80 and a touch in their first game, 5-3, 4-4-4, and then faded a little bit. Had 2 games, 2 catches, 3 catches, 1 catch for -1 yards against Baylor. And then in the Big 12 title game, 7 for 101 and a touchdown, and then caught a touchdown versus Florida in the bowl game where, they basically could rest everybody in the second half. So, but 9 touchdowns in his freshman season. He scored 6 touchdowns in the first 5 games. So, he started off absolutely white hot and then, kind of faded a little bit. And, I'm not sure if he was nursing an injury or what may have happened there. He did also return punts, but, this guy is just smooth as butter. He had finished the season with 37, 6'10", and 9, 20% market share, 33% in the slot, which is actually a really nice number. I kind of love, between 30 and 40%, 25 and 40% or so, to show that you can move into the slot. You can be a weapon, at all positions, but for the NFL stud, we're trying to project out to the eventual end game of being an NFL wide receiver one. I don't think you want a pure slot. And that could change as the NFL continues to evolve. And there are some really, really good slot receivers, especially in the 2021 class. But I think if we're really trying to project out a guy years away. I do want a guy who's going to play and win at least a lot on the outside. And Marvin Mims certainly showed he could do that at 33% in the slots. So that means most of his time was spent outside. Just a really slick athlete. Just didn't really blow any of this, spark or camps away. But was obviously, once the lights came on at Oklahoma, I mean, he was just absolutely incredible from the opening week. And so he jumps all the way up to my second spot. Hit the breakout target share or breakout market share, and I'm fine with that. We definitely want to see a guy eventually get up to 30%, but as a true freshman, I mean, 20% is brilliant. And so, yeah, I mean, Marvin Mims pretty easily and comfortably, in my opinion. Here, I would, weight is going to be something we're going to watch with him. Definitely want him to get up closer, especially standing 5'11". So he does probably want to see him around 200. Plenty of time to do that, though. And he doesn't even have to get probably all the way to 200. The other thing is, I just want to correct myself. And what I was trying to type in there was his, his prospect profile. He was actually from Texas. So he was kind of a legendary Texas high school receiver with all sorts of records, I believe. So, I think it's a lesson for some of us. He was pretty far down. I think wide receiver 26 in the nation. Texas is 24th prospect, I think, something like that, in the lists. But, frankly, and we say this a lot when we're looking at college players and trying to project them in the NFL, it probably holds true somewhat in high school. Just get good players. Look, if a guy absolutely dominates any place he is, no matter the level, no matter, if it's an unknown school or whatever, if a guy thoroughly dominates, like record-setting dominates, you have to pay attention. And Marvin Mims is probably a guy that is worth, just keeping in mind. Other guys in the NFL are guys like Danny Woodhead, absolutely destroy the competition at the FCS or even Division II level. But basically undrafted in the NFL, and he carved out a nice role. Now, was he, a Saquon Barkley 3-down workhorse? No, but he's good. Good players, especially players that absolutely destroy their competition, are probably going to be good at the next level when you increase their competition. Anyway, so that's just a little lesson there, mostly for myself as well. I mean, Mims was, like I said, 24th, 26th receiver on the list. And so pretty much off anyone's radar until he stepped on the field, and then very much on all of our radars. But he just looks incredible. Really, really good, solid, smooth receiver from what I have seen. Next is Jordan Addison. This is a guy who had an interesting path to stardom for Pittsburgh. So he was listed as an athlete. I think played a lot of safety, was recruited as a safety by a lot of teams. And just again, one of these guys from the jump was basically the number one receiver for Pitt. Finished the season at 60 for an ominous 666 yards, 4 touchdowns, and his market share on the season was 24. He also threw in 9 for 58 rushing and was a punt returner. And when we're projecting for next level contributions, punt returns and early in the career, I wrote an article about it, but it matters. It is definitely a positive indicator. Really comes into play when you're talking about later NFL draft picks. So like, 4th, 5th, 6th round draft picks that end up going to contribute and be fantasy relevant. They all probably did return punts. When you get into a first round pick, it's not quite as something you have to have, but it definitely doesn't hurt, especially early in your career when we're saying these guys have serious NFL potential. Being the punt returner for a major Power 5 team, especially right off the bat, shows that you are dynamic and they want to get you on the field. They trust you. Concentration, things like that is to field a punt, you have to have a concentration. They're not going to put someone back there who, is flaky or loses concentration because you're talking about a fumble and a huge turn of possession. So, Anyway, it's a positive indicator. I just like it. It checks the box. So Addison, though, is going to be a bit of a weight watcher type guy, 6 feet, listed at 170. Now, he may have already put on some weight. I think his profile was even smaller than that. So he put on some before his freshman season. And we'll see what the offseason workouts. And usually these teams update their weights and stuff, in the summertime before August. And so we are hoping he can do that. When a guy gets to like at least 185, I think we're pretty good. He definitely can get there. So, just something to watch. But if you're awesome, you're awesome. And Devontae Smith is probably going to be a high first round pick, and he's about that size as a senior. So I think Addison will at least get higher than wherever Smith is sitting at in terms of his weight. But really just commanded all the important targets. He had a 24% market share, and he missed at least one game. So I think he flirted with 30 or so if you just included the games that he played. And was used as a rushing threat, which is really nice. Quentin Johnson for Texas Christian, another guy who was kind of buried on the recruiting ranks, but I definitely saw some whispers about him, liking him by some Twitter, touts and stuff, guys that are really following these recruits closely. I have to say, as I've gotten into this, the rising freshmen, so, high school seniors digging through all the college tape, that's certainly something I haven't been able to really get too deep into at this stage in my development and doing this. I know obviously that's really important, but I really want to see what guys do at the next level before I start getting too hyper about them, projecting all the way to the NFL. We'll talk about two guys later in this list that so many people thought were just slam dunks, and the depth chart even looked good for one of them. And I mean, zeros all the way up and down the board, zeros. So I think it's tough to make that jump. So I just want to see freshmen who are coming in and actually doing something to feel confident about the ranking. But anyway, sorry, we're going back to Quentin Johnston. That's with a T. Quentin Johnston, 6'4", 193 listed right now. So I think he's going to put on some weight and be a real nice size for the NFL. He finished with 22 catches for 487 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he just barely missed a 20% market share, I believe, at 19%, only 6% in the slot. So he was that X receiver for Texas Christian. He also chipped in 2 rushing TDs. And I think they were kind of like pop pass jet sweeps near the end zone because he only had 3 rushing yards on the whole season, but 2 of them went for touchdowns. So again, that, a 2-yard end around is not necessarily super duper impressive, but the fact that coaches said, we need a play to get in the end zone right now, and we're going to give it to our true freshman. I mean, that kind of thing, read between the lines, that matters. It says that they thought he was a dynamic playmaker who could convert near the end zone. That's impressive. And then, a quick Twitter search for the videos or clips or whatever you want. I mean, he has multiple highlight reels, long passes, long catches. I mean, 22 for 47. So we're talking about over 20 yards of reception as a true freshman. And there were just bombs. He would get isolated deep on a guy and they had no chance. I mean, with his frame and ability to have his body control, and he's smooth. I sent out a tweet comparing some Senior Bowl players to, that people are kind of hyping up because it's the Senior Bowl and we have nothing else to watch. But comparing them to some of these guys who are rising sophomores, rising juniors, and already doing the things that we're excited these seniors are doing. And Quentin Johnston, to me, is a guy that we should be very excited about. If we're even kind of excited about Nico Collins, Trayvon Grimes, who else is a big, tall receiver at the Senior Bowl? Josh Palmer, I think, from Tennessee. I mean, these are seniors who really never did a whole lot in their career, and we get them at the Senior Bowl, and everyone's like, oh, he's 6'3", he's a fluid mover, yada, yada, yada. Quentin Johnson, 6'4", he's a fluid mover, and he just hit almost 20% as a true freshman. This is the guy we should get real excited about, not necessarily the Senior Bowl dude who, gets a spotlight for a week. Certainly not saying senior receivers are useless, and sometimes we have guys break through. I mean, Tyler Lockett comes to mind as a true senior who has really carved out a very solid, good career in the NFL and very relevant for fantasy. But I mean, even he's not challenging to be like the wide receiver one, or really, I don't think many lists are going to have him as a top 12 consensus dynasty receiver in his entire career. So he's nice and it can happen, but senior receivers don't usually get to that elite level. And if we're prospecting, if we're stashing guys in Devy, or we're rostering our C2C, or we're drafting a startup and, we want to, take guys that have a chance to really do something, I would much rather Quentin Johnston over your favorite, junior who hasn't broken out yet. That's it. If he breaks out as a junior or even as a senior, Warren Jackson. I mean, if Warren Jackson was coming back to school, I'd much rather Quentin Johnston over Warren Jackson, even though we've seen Warren Jackson do more for longer. When they break out like this at this age, these are the guys you need to get very excited about. So Quentin Johnston for TCU. His quarterback is very suspect. So I have a feeling the raw numbers may not be there his entire career, but this is why market share is so important, and let's keep track of him. Right now, maybe you could say he's a one-trick pony, but it is a great trick, and he's got plenty of time to build more into his game. Really like Quentin Johnston. Raheem Jarrett comes in at number 5. So Johnston was 4. Jarrett is number 5 for me. And there's an argument. I mean, I know some people thought he was the number 1 receiver in the class. He is 6 feet. He's 200 pounds, which is just nice for a true freshman. Stocky, thick, very strong kid. 17 for 252 and 2. Now that's in 4 games of a COVID weird season, especially for Maryland. COVID did not impact schedules and teams the same. Some ended up getting a full 10 games in, some ended up getting more than that. Some only maybe missed 1 game, but some of the Big 10 and Pac-12 teams, I mean, they only got in 3-4 games. And those were like staccato, one game, 2 weeks off, 1 game, 3 weeks off, then another game. I mean, it was a mess, especially for Big 10, Pac-12. So, Maryland was one of those teams that happened to. I think they only ended up getting 4 games in. And so he still put up, 17, 252 and 2. That was good for 20% market share. So again, market share, especially in this weird COVID season, is going to really help us kind of level that playing field. Instead of looking at the raw numbers, we can compare market shares. So he's right up there, almost a breakout as a true freshman, 86% in the slot. Which that stocky build kind of is nice in the slot. You can use a lot of space. You don't always have a corner right on you, and you can kind of get a guy on some free releases, quick slants, and then they can use their, physicality and their yards after catch ability in some of those situations. So I like that. Yeah, I mean, he's a very good talent. I mean, he had 1 game where maybe almost half of that production came from, I think both touchdowns might have been in the same game. And he just looked really, really nice in that 1 game. But, the sky's the limit. He has a pedigree. He looked good. And, I don't want to necessarily give a pass for doing nothing on your team in the COVID year, but certainly not putting up more yards in the COVID year is okay. I mean, we're talking about averaging over 4 receptions a game for his 4 games. I mean, that's great for a true freshman. And yeah, hitting that 20% market share. Future is bright for Jarrett. Jermaine Burton for Georgia, 6 foot, 195. So another one of these just like stocky, really tough to necessarily tackle guys. And here's a really impressive thing for Burton, coming in this year, the 3 receivers for Georgia were Karis Jackson, who I believe is a redshirt sophomore. I think he's a little older, maybe even a junior. George Pickens, who's, everybody's like, well, a lot of people's like number one in the 22 class, coming in expecting a huge year. And then you had Jermaine Burton, a true freshman from California. So, making a huge trip across the country in the COVID offseason, all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And he finished at an 18% market share and really came on when JT Daniels really revived that offense. And he looked great. I mean, he had one game where he went totally off. I think maybe scored twice in that game. But just looks good. Kind of looks like a yak monster. Looks like a guy who can catch and run and be physical after the catch, actually. Kind of one of these guys that, like, quote, looks like a running back once he catches the ball a little bit. But, only 21% in the slot. So he was doing this work on the outside. And in the games that JT Daniels played, Pickens looked great, but Burton actually was about on par with Pickens. I mean, he kind of matched him in the games. If you just look at the JT Daniels games, Burton pretty much matched him in production. And that's really impressive. I mean, because Pickens is like everyone's the guy. And Burton, if nothing else, was like neck and neck, on his heels as a true freshman. So I think the future is very bright for Burton. I know some really smart people that were on him, even though he wasn't necessarily super high rated in the class. I mean, his high school tape to me didn't look, incredibly explosive, but he did it in real life. And I think he gets away with, he's maybe not just like a gazelle out there, but he does work. He gets open, he makes good catches and can, get some extra yards. And I think he's a good, solid player with a really nice upside. And I think room to move up these rankings next year. Parker Washington for Penn State. Now, there's another guy who was fairly low in the recruiting rankings, but just came out and hit 20% as a true freshman. I don't think anyone really saw this coming, especially because Dotson, a junior, I think, for Penn State, junior breakout, basically the first time he was very relevant. And he started off super hot. And then Parker Washington started coming on, finished at 36 for 489 and 6 touchdowns. I mean, that's really strong freshman season. And, again, the raw numbers won't blow your mind, but 20% market share. Now, he was 97% in the slot. So pretty much only slot for Parker Washington. 5'10", 205. So kind of a tank, especially for a receiver. I mean, there's some running backs headed to the NFL draft that aren't that big this year. So, definitely a solid build. Watch some tape on him. There wasn't a highlight reel or anything to just get a quick look. I had to actually go through the game film, which I love doing, but, sometimes you just want to, get a quick feel for a guy. And, but yeah, I saw some nice catches getting open in the zone. A couple nice touchdown catches. I mean, nothing that was just truly eye-popping, but, very solid. Looks like a shifty little route runner, which you would expect in the slot. And, at that size, I think he can do some damage. And as he grows and maybe gets a little more versatile, I think he's certainly one guy to watch. And had one play against Michigan State, caught like a little maybe a comebacker or an in, and then basically shed one tackle and then was off to the races and ended up beating a safety for a long, like 60+ yard touchdown. So certainly he's got some speed there too, long speed, able to convert a long pass. In addition to showing some of that blocking or, tackle breaking ability, which you would expect a guy that thick on a DB. He's bigger than most of the DBs he's going to face. And he was a very interesting player. Jackson Smith and Jigba for Ohio State. He was very highly rated, 5-star recruit. And, the Ohio State receivers, topic of much discussion and debate, especially if you tune into the Devy Debate podcast. I highly recommend it. It's a great show. But, one of the guys, Matt Brunig, on there is a Ohio State fan. And so they talk about the Ohio State receivers like every single week. And they brought in like this ridiculous recruiting class, and basically none of them did anything because Garrett Wilson was awesome, and Chris Olave is a great receiver too. So there was no room for a true freshman to come in. I would say JSN was one of the better ones of the trio, I think, that they signed, that were all high 4 stars or 5 stars. He finished only 10 for 49. He did have one really nice touchdown in the back of an end zone, leaping up over a guy, toe tap at the end of the end zone. I mean, I think it was kind of early in the season. People were obviously freaking out about it when it happened. Basically negligible. I mean, market share, not even worth mentioning. 50% in the slot. He did have some punt returns. So, of the freshman receivers, he was the guy who was getting on the field for special teams. I think it was 3 punt returns. They had a shortened season too, but it was either Garrett Wilson or JSN for punt returns. And so, that's pretty nice. I like that. He was the most used of their trio. And, that says something. Most receptions, got some punt returns, scored a touchdown. But otherwise, it is TBD on these Ohio State receivers. Not going to, a lot of them got on the field at least. They weren't complete zeros. And, I think as a freshman, we can excuse this. When you start going to like junior, senior years and you want to blame depth chart on like the fact that they didn't do anything until they're, were 21 years old, I get a little bit more skeptical. But as true freshmen with Garrett Wilson and Olave there, we can forgive not a big breakout. So JSN still listed in my top 10, but when we see it on the field, these are all good depth charts. And when we see it on the field, those guys take precedence for me. I mean, that's just how I rank. That's how I do it. I would rather have those other guys above him, even though the ceiling seems high for him. And these other guys weren't slouches. I mean, I'm not like I'm taking some 2-star who broke out for Akron and putting him ahead. But when these guys show it on the field and they're commanding the targets, that's kind of what I want to see. And Olave and Wilson are back next year too. So we're going to be making the same excuses. So then we're going to have these guys who don't break out at least probably until year 3 if they don't transfer. And then if they have one good season, maybe they go, but maybe they stay. And now we're talking about 4-year guys. I mean, it snowballs to me. And maybe as recruiting becomes so much more concentrated on the elites, as we know, Bama, Clemson, Ohio State, we're going to have to adjust. But the facts are, history says, if you stay for 4 years, you don't have the ceiling in the NFL. If you break out late, you don't have the ceiling in the NFL. I mean, it does matter when we are talking about fantasy and wanting the elite of the elite. Okay, not necessarily they can't be productive in the NFL or they can't make a team or they can't be a starter, but for the elite production, it starts to snowball, especially after year 2. Now, I'm giving a pass in year 1. They're not buried on my rankings, but that's how I play. That's how I do it. Clemson, EJ Williams, 6'3", 190. Very good long frame for a freshman. He was 24 for 306 and 2, and this is where market share can help you understand what exactly happened. He only had an 8% market share, even though his counting numbers are better than Raheem Jarrett, and better than JSN, better than some other guys on the raw numbers. But the market share isn't quite as impressive because Clemson threw a lot and he was able to gobble up some. Now, it definitely needs to be said he got on the field and he contributed, but the market share isn't necessarily super impressive. He was only 9% in the slot. So again, you like to see that. At least they're throwing him out there. He's probably beating some one-on-one corners. Yeah, I mean, looks like a good player. Long, kind of in that Justin Ross body shape, body style. And we'll see next year. We'll have EJ Williams, Joe Ngata, and Frank Ladson, and probably Justin Ross. So we'll see what happens. Can he build on this and maybe leapfrog some of those guys in year 2? And that would be very promising. Say he's the second leading receiver next year. That's going to be very promising. If he's not buried on the depth chart and can leap some of these guys that we've liked from the classes ahead of him, that will be huge for his projection, I think. And finally, rounding out the top 10, we've got Jaden Walley. Now, this was like kind of a guy buried, but still a 4-star, I believe. But, went to Mississippi State and man, he was great. He was sensational in the second half of the season. Basically in the first half, they were ham and egging every single week. It seemed like a new receiver was getting all the targets and the yards. And then all of a sudden, Wally blew up, and he was clearly their number one receiver every single week. He finished at 52 for 718 and 2, market share of 18%, 96% in the slot, though, which is, this is one where you could maybe take it with a grain of salt, because Mississippi State goes 4 wide or 5 wide in that air raid. That means you have a lot of slot receivers on the field at the same time, and they just funnel targets to the slot. So I don't know if that says he's our best receiver, we're going to put him in the slot because this offense features the slot, or if it's like, let's put him in the slot because he can't beat outside coverage. But I think it's more of the former. They want their best players in the slot for the air raid. And so, this was in the SEC. He looked really good. I know he caught some long passes, showed good long speed, 6 feet, 180. And, we'll have to see. The air raid used to be in the Pac-12. I think we were like, Pac-12. But we'll see what happens in the SEC. And if nothing else, I think he definitely deserves to be on the radar. 718 yards, almost 20% market share, true freshman. That's certainly worth absolutely keeping an eye on. And he's going to be my wide receiver 10 because, again, he has done it. He has shown I can rise to the top of the depth chart, even though obviously Mississippi State's depth chart was not overly impressive. That is your top 10 wide receivers for the 2023 class. Pretty exciting, actually. I mean, I think the top 6 are looking very strong. Boutte, Mims, Addison, Johnston, Jarrett, Burton. And then I think there's some question marks, but still lurking is, one of the absolute studs in the class, JSN, EJ Williams at Clemson. He's going to catch passes from DJU. So there's a lot. I mean, I think this is becoming quite a trend, is that receiver looks really good 2 and 3 years away, and has been good for the last 2 years, even showing it now in the NFL. So the watch list, we're going to go Damon Demas for Texas A&M. A lot of people think this guy's the best receiver in the class. He is an athletic freak. If you find his clips, I mean, he's doing cartwheel, I don't know, just all sorts of acrobatic craziness at 6'3", 180 pounds coming out of high school. A little bit of a weird story. I mean, injured. I think he either transferred or was injured, didn't play his senior year. So I think coming into college, it was, he was rusty, a year off, but he had 1 target on the entire season. Yes, I know it was COVID. Yes, I know Jimbo Fisher apparently is kind of a hard ass when it comes to playing true freshman, whatever. He wasn't a hard ass on Isaiah Spiller, though. I mean, we make excuses for guys when we already like them and we want them to succeed, and I do it myself. But it is concerning to me. He was active for 4 games and had 1 target. So even if his market share wasn't good, even if he, whatever, was injured to start the season, if he was active for 4 games, dressed out, playing the game technically, and got 1 target. So he's on the watch list still, but he's off my radar for now in terms of a top 10, a guy I'm excited to roster in C2C even, honestly, because, hey, all these other guys we just talked about experienced COVID too. And they got in the end zone. They got 10 catches at least. JSN did, 0 and 1 target. I don't care how athletic you are. I mean, it's just, he's obviously got some things to learn, some nuance of the position to learn. And to me, that says he's behind these other guys, despite his athletic ability, which is clearly off the charts. And the same goes for actually Julian Fleming. I mean, he's another guy that, the stuff I heard about him, some guys were not ranking him the number 1, even though that was what 247 said. And the argument was simply he's an athlete, not a receiver. And yes, of course, can he learn? Yeah, we're not writing these guys off completely, but if you have to learn the nuances of being a wide receiver, that's okay. And he could blow up next year like Jamar Chase did, and he's, everyone's wide receiver 1. That is possible. That's absolutely possible. But again, I keep beating the dead horse. Right now, these guys ahead of him have shown they've got the nuance. They can go out there and command targets. They're getting open. They're playing on the field. They're starting for their team. So I think they are right now ahead. Now, maybe is their ceiling not quite the same as like if Julian Fleming or Demas gets it all together? No, they're not, because some of them aren't the athletes that these guys are. But I don't love banking on them getting it together. I mean, how many players do we just dream on the athleticism and they never put the football side together? I mean, Christine Michael, Dorial Green Beckham. I mean, you could go on and on about like Bryce Brown, who just guys who just have the ridiculous physical athletic ability, but never learn how to play the position. And that's what concerns me for these guys who really come and struggle a lot in year one. It seems like they may have a long way to go for the technique and some of the stuff that guys just sometimes never get. And maybe they were out athleticizing people in high school. LV Bunkley Shelton. He is interesting because Arizona State recruit. He was a 4-star, so certainly not a unknown guy altogether, but I think he was actually one of their highest rated recruits, or at least highest rated receivers to come in. He's 5'11", 190, very nice size, actually. Build kind of under 6 feet, but still getting close to 200 is very nice. Now, he finished with 11 for 100. So don't let that fool you, though, because in Arizona State's weird season, that's a 17% market share. As a true freshman, I'm impressed. He led the team in receiving receptions, I think, with 11. And led the team, I believe, in yards for a receiver. Rashad White, the running back who caught a lot of passes, had more yards, I think. But really impressive. I mean, was like the go-to guy in this offense for the short, tiny little season that they had, as right on campus. So I think that's impressive. Like, to me, that's maybe more impressive than, DeMoss, who didn't do anything at all, nothing. So, and it's not like the Texas A&M depth chart was like Ohio State. I mean, we have a little excuse for Ohio State. Anyway, I'm going too much into that. LV Bunkley Shelton, though, do not sleep on this kid. He looked good. He's stocky. I saw a couple bubble screens where he would catch and make a nice little run after the catch. He had one very nice, I mean, we're talking 11 receptions on the whole season. So, bear with me. I didn't see tons of tape on him, but did see one nice, out route where he caught the ball in front of the corner, pretty extended near the sideline, toe tapped one in, and it was a catch. And he looks thick. I like that. He looks thick as a true freshman. I'm interested in him. This is a guy exactly. People are loving Frank Darby at the Senior Bowl. I'd rather have LV Bunkley Shelton all day long, who outproduced him even this year that it was supposed to be Darby. So, we have to look at these young kids that do it early and not just get excited when you hear the name at the Senior Bowl. We're going to give some G5 guys some love. Kyle Williams for UNLV. Now, you probably have not heard of him unless you follow me on Twitter, and then, you probably have seen me tweet about him. We actually did the Sleeper Saturday last week, so if you're just coming in now, go check that out. Last week's Sleeper Saturday was Kyle Williams. This is a true freshman who has a 30% market share. Now, he only caught 35 balls for 426 yards and 2 touchdowns, but that was 30% of UNLV's production, which is just bonkers. Now, I know it's G5, it's UNLV. They play in the Mountain West, though, which isn't that bad. I mean, San Diego State, San Jose State, Boise State, those teams have decent defenses. I mean, it's better than the Sun Belt, honestly. That's really something. I mean, UNLV's quarterback situation was horrible. Obviously, we did the whole film review for Sleeper Saturday. And their quarterback situation, I think they played 3 rotating the season. One game had 3 quarterbacks. I mean, just not even injury related. I mean, just trash related. So this is really impressive. His best attribute is making the first guy miss. He catches in one-on-one situations. And he routinely makes one juke and gets extra yards. I think that's real promising. He does a lot of magic after the catch. And there was a couple instances of pretty nice route running. One where he faked the corner, went for the post, totally turned around the DB, was 15 yards open in the end zone. 19% in the slots. He was very much on the outside, I can say, because I watched a bunch of his games. This is the making of a potential, maybe even 3-year player in the G5 and making the leap if he continues to get better. And then Kyron Lacey, he is an interesting dude for Louisiana. first, the good things are 15% market share as a true freshman in an offense that didn't really want to throw the ball that much. Caught 28 for 364 and 4 touchdowns. I believe he led the team in receiving touchdowns as a true freshman. And 19% in the slot again, so primarily outside guy, and 6'3", 212 pounds. So that's real exciting. I mean, thick, looks like a beast out there, honestly. The negatives, didn't see a whole lot of excellent route running. Definitely seemed to do the classic body catch. I mean, multiple catches where he's catching it like this. So, but there's time to learn. Watch list for sure. Kyron Lacey, has got that big build. And if he can learn a little more of the technique behind being a receiver, showed a lot of promise in year one for Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. All right. In the interest of time, we're going to just bump along. I mean, there's a lot of receivers we could talk about. Hit me up on Twitter, comments, whatever. I mean, I've got a whole list here. I've got another 15 I could talk to you about, but we gotta wrap it up. 3 tight ends. Keep your eye on. Very obviously, Eric Gilbert, who I believe was the highest rated tight end in 247 history, had 13% market share for LSU. 6'5", 250 pounds. He was 35 for 368 and 2. Watching the LSU film, he lined up routinely, basically on the outside in the slot. I mean, I'll tell you what, I was watching Marshall, did not realize Gilbert was number 2 and kept seeing this massive receiver. And I was like, who is number 2? Looked him up, and obviously it's Eric Gilbert. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But he wasn't even playing tight end. I mean, just absolute weapon offensively, and hopefully he'll grow into a complete tight end, because that is probably what we want to see for the NFL. But athletically, size, he's a freak. I mean, absolute freak. So for fantasy, this is what you dream of. Slam dunk there. Like I said, top recruit at tight end in 247 history, I believe. Michael Mayer for Notre Dame. He looked great this year. 6'5", 235, so a little bit smaller, but I'm sure he's going to put on 15 pounds at least. 42 for 450 and 2 touchdowns. He tied, I think, for the lead of Notre Dame in receptions for a tight end as a true freshman. I mean, that's saying something. 17% market share. I mean, if you're a senior tight end and you have 17% market share, I'm going to take notice, much more a true freshman, 54% in the slot. Really, really nice player here. Looks like a complete tight end. Super athletic, fluid for 6'5", 235. Exciting player for sure. We have a bonkers class here in 2021, 2023, looking very nice as well. And then rounding out the top 3, Darnell Washington for UGA. He was a very high recruit, 6'7", 260. I mean, woof, that's a man right there. He was 7 for 166, market share kind of negligible, but he only played 4 games, which is, impressive. 7 catches in 4 games. 35% slot. He had his best game of the season in the bowl game. So, kind of ramping up and hopefully finishing strong. And, with JT Daniels next year, and they could have a very scary offense at Georgia with, you got Pickens, you got Burton, we already talked about, Darnell Washington, JT Daniels. As a Gator fan, I am concerned that offense is going to be actually competent next year, and that was the only thing really holding them back. So, Darnell Washington looks athletic out there at 6'7", 260, and at tight end, I mean, that's all you need to be on my radar. And we'll see if he builds on his freshman season next year. These guys are not super sleepers or anything like that. They're all pretty high recruits. But just so you know the names, Eric Gilbert, though, if you're C2C or whatever your format is, if it rewards tight ends or if it's 2 tight end, he becomes very premium, very, very premium, and Mayer for that matter. But Gilbert, has just historical type ceiling because of who he was as a recruit and what he already showed in his true freshman season. Now he gets to go to Florida. He's transferring, to fill the Kyle Pitts role. And we all know what Kyle Pitts is doing. So very, very exciting for Eric Gilbert. And that is it. We are just under an hour, but really fun to talk about these 2023 guys. That wraps up our 2023 discussion. We will be back next week with 2024. We're going to have a special guest, the Boz, who really grinds that high school tape. He should be able to help us out, sort through what incoming freshmen we really need to put a pin in and keep an eye on. If you like what you heard, subscribe down below. Follow me on Twitter. That's AL_FF_RED right there on the screen. Yeah, we're going to keep doing this. Sleeper Saturdays on Saturday. We're going to uncover and do an actual film review so you can get a good look at some very lesser known guys, of G5 maybe, or underrated Power 5 guys. So definitely keep a lookout for Sleeper Saturday all off season. And then the week we're going to be doing content as well. So, yep, like and subscribe, do all that good stuff. And we will see you next time.